And it's so true. We serve a God that does the impossible and makes it look easy. And we're going to talk about that for the next few minutes. But before we do, I've got some really exciting news for you. And it's this: Christmas is 119 days away from today. How about that, right? I know some of you are stressed out already about your list as soon as I say it. That's just maddening, but I love Christmas. And by the way, this year, Advent and Christmas is going to be amazing here. Like, you should probably plan your travel around it, not the other way around, just saying. But it got me thinking about the message this week and how excited I am for Christmas in August. Plus, apparently, this is the same weather at Christmas time, so why not, you know? That's new for us. But I got thinking about one of my favorite characters for Christmas. Do you remember this guy? George. You remember his last name, George? George Bailey, what a guy. This is from It's a Wonderful Life, one of the best Christmas movies, the best Christmas movie ever, unless you count Die Hard, and then we need to talk after this. But I love the movie, and it may be one of the best movies ever of any kind. And it's this. If you don't know the story, George Bailey is this guy who's at the end of his rope. He is on Christmas Eve about to end his life, jump into the river and just call it, because he feels like everything he touches goes wrong and the world would actually just be a better place without him in it. And he gets rescued by this guy, and you remember him maybe, old Clarence. Clarence, the guardian angel, bumbling and stumbling his way, trying to get his wings. And he helps George by showing him what life would be like if he had never been born, and how his community would be impacted and how his family would be impacted. And it got me thinking about this idea that we can never understand, you can never predict the ripple effect of your life on your family and on the community around you. You just can't know some of the decisions that we make today, how they're going to impact the future. So we've been talking all about faith, and that's really what faith is. Faith is choosing to make steps when you can't see the outcome, but you're trusting God, and you're saying, I'm willing to do whatever you ask because I believe that there's something more and better here. Kind of like God turning graves into gardens. Only our God can do that type of thing. And so I want to end this series this way. We're talking about courageous faith, and I'm going to break every good rule of a preacher and communicator, and I'm going to tell you my main point where we're going to end right now. And the big idea for this message today is this: having courageous faith. It lets you experience what is possible by saying yes to God. The only way that you get to experience everything that is possible on the other side of your yes to God is often by having courageous faith. Hebrews 11 finishes like this, the chapter we've been looking at. It says, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I don't have time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, David, and Samuel, and the prophets who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. By faith, they shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Listen to this. Women received back their dead, raised to life again because of their faith. They were put to death by stoning, though. It wasn't perfect. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. And then my favorite line here, it says, and the world was not worthy of them. I want to have faith that a watching world looking at the way that I act in the face of fear would make them say, that guy's too much for me. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you love to leave a legacy where people who don't share that faith could look at you and just go, man, I want to be like that, and I don't even know how I could. The story I want to show you as we wrap this up is about a woman, a very unlikely character and a hero of faith named Rahab. It's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And you already know part of it, likely, even if you went to Sunday school as a kid, you'll remember some of this story. Maybe you just have listened to good old music where we talk about Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. What does that even mean? But Joshua fought this battle. We're talking about Rahab and Jericho, and here's the way it goes. Joshua is about to lead the people of Israel into the promised land. They've been rescued out of Egypt in that miraculous exodus, come through the Red Sea, and now they're supposed to step into what God had promised for them. It was going to require faith, though, because even though he said, this land is yours, they were going to have to put some action with their faith to take it, because there were some powerful enemy city-states, wicked and evil places that were much stronger than them. Remember, they were slaves who had just now begun this nation. They didn't really know how to fight. All they had to hold on to was the trust that Yahweh, their God, was going to go with them. And so they come into the promised land, and the first city they're going to have to deal with is one called Jericho. Now, Jericho is the oldest continually inhabited city in the history of the world. Still to this day, it's got people, something like 13,000 years that there's been people living there. And Jericho's famous for its walls. It had the first set of walls that were used for defense, for military. And the walls around Jericho were about 20 feet high. There was a double set of them. So the one closest in was 20 feet tall, made of block, and then there was another about 12 feet tall wall, about 10 to 12 feet away from that, made out of brick. It was an impenetrable city. If you lived in Jericho, you believed that nothing could affect you. They had a spring that fed them water. They were absolutely independent. They were pagan culture, really, really nasty stuff. Sacrifice and prostitution at the temple and all kind of stuff that would just make God angry. And so God was going to use his people moving into their promised place to judge that. It says this, Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. First question that you should ask, why did the 2 guys, the children of Israel, the people with the 10 commandments, why was their first stop the prostitute's house? And here's why I think. It's not what you think. It's because everyone in the city was used to seeing strange men go in and out of Rahab's house. That would have been an easy place for them to hide. See, they didn't look and probably didn't smell like the people of Jericho. They were different, but Rahab was different too. She was an other. We're told in Scripture that Rahab's house was between the 2 walls. Even geographically, her position in life was outside of everybody else, outside of society. And it's because of her occupation. She was a prostitute, not by choice. I mean, who is? Last weekend, Jessica and I got to go to benefit for our friends northeast of the well and got to hear from women who had been set free by God and by people from sex trafficking. And it's just a powerful partner that we have here. And as I listened to their stories, I actually was thinking about Rahab, like how much pain and how much damage has to be done to you to choose that. No one wants to be a prostitute, but that's her lot in life. And she lives away from everybody else, ostracized and other. Spies go in, and the king finds out that the spies have gone there. Somebody says, I think I saw a couple of foreigners going in. Now, it's interesting. Rahab is known in the Hebrew tradition, in the Mishnah, as one of the 4 most beautiful women in the world who've ever lived, along with Sarah, Abraham's wife, we looked at a couple weeks ago, Abigail, one of David's wives, and Esther. And so it probably didn't hurt that she was gorgeous, but Rahab was the kind of person that people didn't talk to, you just talked about her. So in the spies go. The king sends his men, and he says, I want you to go figure out what's going on with those 2. So it says the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. The king's guys come and they knock on the door, and she says, yes, the men came to me, but I didn't know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left, and I don't know which way they went. Go chase after them, though. Maybe you can catch up. But she had taken them up to the roof, and she had hidden them under the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. Okay, how many of you have watched even one episode of Law and Order in your life, right? You know this is not the way it goes. How did the king's men, who were supposed to be searching for the enemy who had invaded, why did they not ransack the place? Like, they turn the mattresses upside down, empty the drawers, rip open pillows, their feathers flying. That's how you do a search. Why didn't the guys go inside Rahab's house? One reason is because even in a culture as wicked and evil as Jericho, to enter the house of a woman like Rahab invited a curse on you. I want you to understand how deeply outsider this woman is, especially if you've ever felt as like an outsider. If you've ever believed that your past or your present or your shame or your guilt makes you far away from God, because what he's about to do is exactly for you. It already requires faith. She hides these guys at the risk of her own life. Why would she do that? I mean, they are the enemy. And she chooses, something about them says, I'm going to take care of them. We find out just a couple verses later. It says, before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and she said to them, look, I know that the Lord, Yahweh, our God, I know that he's given you this land, and a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan that you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear and everyone's courage failed because of you. Have you ever faced something in life that you kind of get exactly what she's talking about, where your courage just seemed to melt? Maybe it was that moment that the worst news you could possibly imagine came, or the challenge was so big and you just felt as if your heart literally melted. Everybody lost their courage except Rahab. Listen to this, her confession. She says, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. This is why she chose to make it something in Rahab knew that the God of Israel was the God, and that the shenanigans that had been going on in the place where she lived didn't have anything to do with real power. That because of the story and his legacy and all of that, but something captured her heart. And here's what I want you to know. How many of you don't have to raise your hand, I guess, but how many of you have ever had this thought, and people have asked this of me before, I don't know that I can believe in a God, or how can you believe in a God who would allow someone who's just never had the opportunity to hear about Jesus to go to hell? Like, how is it that if the only way to come to faith and to be rescued and saved is you have to have heard this story, how would he let a 12-year-old Syrian girl who wasn't taught to read and will never hear the name of Jesus, how are they allowed to go? That's a tough question. There's a really good answer. And Rahab is part of that. See, here's the thing. If you want to know God and seek truth, God will find you. It doesn't matter where you live or what the history in your culture is or what you've done. If you want God, he will find you. We hear stories all the time of Jesus even now appearing to people in places that they don't have any other access to him. So you don't have to discount this God's goodness simply because you and I don't understand how he might work it. God was coming after Rahab. That's one of the lessons of this passage. It's also that courageous faith takes action. When she believed this God, she decided to put her faith into action. You've heard the verse, I'm sure, from James 2:17. It says, faith without works is, what is it? Dead. Faith without works is dead. If you believe, but there's no action that kind of proves it or shows that response, James says, I got a question if you really believe. What you might not know is that just a few verses later, he references Rahab in 2:25. He says, in the same way, wasn't even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did? Courageous action of faith steps up even with just a little bit. She didn't have a long faith. She didn't have strong faith. She definitely didn't have perfect faith. She just trusted this God, and in a moment, she allowed her trust to move her to act. Now, we don't have a lot of excuses, right? Because we got a lot of faith, a lot of reasons to trust. Rahab should be pretty inspiring for you and me today to choose to act on that faith. Rahab could have made excuses. Like she's the wrong kind of person, you know? She's from the other side of the tracks. She's actually the wrong ethnicity. She's the wrong everything. These are the people that had the 10 Commandments talking to a prostitute, and yet somehow she believes that God might hear her. It's almost as if she could have believed that she was disqualified, and maybe that's you. Maybe you've thought that before, like, because nobody knows actually your secret or that moment that you're really ashamed of, but somehow you believe that you have gotten disqualified from God loving you, even if you still come to church. You come and you're trying to, there's like the shred of hope that maybe you could work your way back into his favor. Here's the great news. If you think you're disqualified because of what you've done or who you are, your shame and past, congratulations, that makes you qualified. Matter of fact, that's the only thing that qualifies us for the rescue of God, is that we know that we need it. So Rahab takes one huge step on one tiny step of faith, but she doesn't just stop there. She actually asks the enemy to save her and her whole family. Listen to this. She says, "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I've shown kindness to you." That's pretty bold, right? That's like the person who doesn't mind going to return something at the store, even whether you don't have the tags on it or the receipt or not. You just walk in all bold, like, "I know you give me my money back. Let's go." Right here. It's boldness that just blows your mind sometimes. It's boldness of a woman who would say, "Nothing is going to stop me from getting what I need. I need my family to be rescued." So she says, "Will you save them all? Give me a sign that you'll spare the lives of my father and mother and my brothers and sisters and everybody who belongs to them, and that you'll save us from death." And the men say, "Our lives for your lives. If you don't tell what we're doing, we'll treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." This is the second aspect of courageous faith. It doesn't just take action, but it always impacts others. It always has a ripple effect that's bigger than you could think. She saved her entire family by this one bold request. And her belief, this little trust, is that even though the story of her family would have them be destroyed with the rest of the inhabitants, she believes that doesn't have to be the next chapter in her story. And you've got that. Maybe the story of your family is one that's got all kind of like broken places. I mean, maybe not. Maybe your family is the perfect one, that like when I said Christmas earlier, you're just thinking of how wonderful the gathering is going to be. Everyone's going to get along. Perfect little white snow outside. Cousin Eddie's never going to show up because you don't even have a Cousin Eddie. It's just like our family is great. But for the rest of us, when we think about our family story and all the junk that's in there, to have the kind of courageous faith to believe that God could write something new, even though there's addiction, even though there's brokenness, even though there's been divorce, trusting a God that would say, "I'll rescue all of you." Man, that's big. Spies tell her to go gather the family together in their house and to take a scarlet cord, a rope the color red of blood, and to hang it out the window so that when they come back, because they're going to come back with a whole bunch of people and it's going to be a battle, and they're thinking about those walls, and they got to know which one she's in to keep their oath. And so they say, "Hang the cord out the window, and if you keep everybody inside, I promise we'll spare you." A scarlet cord. Of course it would be. We talk about the red light district or the novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter. It always seems to represent adultery, outsider, mistake, shame, right? But in the scriptures, there's a scarlet thread or cord that runs through it from page 1 to the end that's all about something else. It's not about shame, it's about salvation and rescue. From the way that the people got out of Egypt by putting blood on the doorpost, that was red. They were saved by red. And then the priests, the high priests, had their garments that had thread of red through it. And the tabernacle God designed, he said, make sure that you weave scarlet threads in through that. They didn't understand why that was a part of the curtain, but God wanted to keep showing them, this is what I'm up to. And then the blood of sacrificed animals would rescue them. And then ultimately, Jesus himself spills scarlet red blood so that we could be saved finally and fully. Like, this is what God's been up to all along. This kind of rescue and salvation is what he does. And so she hangs that thread out the window and the spies leave. And I wonder what those days, maybe even weeks, were like between when they left and when the army came back. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, she made this decision in the moment, and then I'm sure she had those moments of doubting her decision. I don't know. Was that just bad falafel last night, indigestion that made me hide these? Maybe I should just tell the king. She had to have those moments. She's human. And maybe you've had those too, when you've like decided to follow Jesus in a certain way, and then you're like, oh, I don't know, maybe I should just take that back and do it myself. But her courage to trust a God she barely knew ended up saving and rescuing everybody. Here's the way the rest of the story goes. It says, agreed, she replied, let it be as you say. She sent them away, they departed, and tied the scarlet cord in the window, and then the battle comes. And the people of Israel come back, and for 6 straight days, they just walk around the city quietly, like murmuring prayers under their breath. And you have to think, the people whose hearts had been melting with fear inside Jericho and their big walls, they were like, that's it? This is the scary Yahweh people? They just talk, like they just walk and speak under their breath, and then day 7 comes. And the impossible becomes possible. 7 times they march around, they blow the horn, and all that can be heard is the sound of bricks falling and crumbling and stones thudding into the ground, and the wall completely falls down. The thing that they believed could keep them safe and secure from anyone was nothing for God. People of Israel, they yell and shout, and they run inside, and we're told that the sounds outside Rahab's door must have been really difficult to hear, because as part of the judgment on Jericho, the people killed every living thing in the city except for Rahab and the people inside the room with the scarlet thread. Salvation. Some people have questioned the authenticity of the Bible because of this, because they're like, well, if the walls fell down, how did she survive? See, your Bible doesn't make any sense. And then, like in 1907, this German archaeologist group started digging in Jericho, and what they found is all this rubble and then one tower that under years and years and years and years of dirt was still remaining. The one place where God had marked out specifically to rescue Rahab. How beautiful is that? You can trust this Bible. You can trust it with your life. Even if you don't always understand it, it just means that maybe we don't have all the information yet, just like she didn't. But her whole family is saved, and it's a fantastic movie, but it even gets better than that. Joshua says to the 2 men who had spied the land, go into the prostitute's house and go bring out everyone who belongs to her. And so the young men, they did. They got her and her father and her mother and her brother and sisters and this whole gang of people, and they made them in a place outside the camp of Israel. They made them a part of God's people now. How does a pagan prostitute become a part of God's family without this kind of faith? It gets even better than that, though. Matthew, in his gospel, when he's writing like Jesus's lineage, the genealogy, he writes through it, and it's so amazing. In this Matthew 1, he says, salmon, if we're talking about fish, but Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. And Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, another outsider who became in. His son learned from his dad's choice. And Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. Here's all that means. That God didn't just want Rahab to be rescued. He didn't just want Rahab to be part of the family. God looked at this woman that everything that you and I would think disqualified her and said, I want you to be the great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of my son. That's what our God does when we exhibit courageous faith. I don't know exactly where you need to do that, but my guess is the odds of you seeing God come through are not as big as Rahab's were. Whatever it is that you're facing and that I'm facing. This is incredible because courageous faith takes action. Courageous faith impacts others. And then here's the last kind of big point on this. You can never predict what's on the other side of saying yes to God. I told you, I just stated it a different way, but it's the big idea from the beginning. You cannot possibly understand what could be on the other side of you saying, God, I trust you with this. And so I want us to end by actually spending some time praying about it, and maybe you today choosing to take one of those steps of faith. Like, let's don't just hear this as a nice story and go home inspired and then go right back to life as usual. There's something in your life or world or family or something in your job. There's something that God is asking you to step out on courageous faith in. And I just want you today to choose it. Don't delay. Because you can't imagine what the ripple effects of that decision are going to be. Like for some of you, maybe that courageous faith step is you're a young professional and like all you know is that you just got to grind right now. And you're willing to sacrifice social life and spiritual life and family and anything else because the culture's pressuring you. You just got to go for it right now. And like courageous faith might be you saying, I'm going to prioritize faith, just like God asked for a Sabbath, and I'm going to choose to believe that 6 days of giving my best and a 7th of worshiping and resting Him is enough. That would be courageous today. It could be that you're a student, and courageous means you're going to embrace the outsider at your school, even though they will not help you get into the right social group. It might mean, and I hope for some of you this is true, it might mean that today you choose to give your life, surrender it to Jesus. Can I tell you, this past week, one of the great courageous faith stories, we had a guy in his 80s choose to accept Christ for the first time at this church. That doesn't happen. 80-year-olds don't suddenly decide, I've been doing it on my own all this time, but you know what? I think I'll give you a try, God. That just doesn't happen on our own. But that's what happens when God gets invited into the story. And maybe that's you. So we're going to play this song because our worship team is incredible. And they found this song that really kind of helps us reflect on how good God is. It's called Rahab's Lullaby. And in it, the song is imagining Rahab with little Boaz trying to get him to go to sleep at night. And she's telling him the history and the story of God's faithfulness. And here's what I want you to do. I want, while we're singing this, for you to just deal with God for a minute and let this help you reflect. But if you want prayer, because it feels so courageous that like you can't do this on your own, if you want us to pray for you to be able to take that step, I'm going to ask the leaders to come up. And during this song, if you just want to come down and have prayer, we'd love for that to happen. We'd love to help walk with you on that journey. And if today is the day that you're like, I want to give Jesus my life, then we'd love to have that conversation and prayer with you too. You can't imagine. You can't write. You can't predict what God might do if you say yes. So let's go to Him together now. Father, would you open our hearts, clear our minds, and allow us to focus on just what you want to do in these next moments. Would you speak clearly and give us the courage to follow?